Hello and welcome back to my channel. Before you watch this video, make sure you've watched part 1 where I go through the first 20 words that you need to know if you want to work in publishing or you've just started out and people are using these terms and you have no idea what they mean. So welcome to part 2. I'm going to go through the other 20 words that you need to know if you want to work in publishing. So first up we have metadata. This is data about data. If you think of a book, the metadata of that book would be the publication date, the ISBN, the genre, the BIC or BISAC codes. It's data about the data. The next one is Netgalley. This is an online reviewer site used in the publishing industry. So it's where publishers will put their material out there and reviewers can request to see it ahead of publication date, and in return they will leave an honest review. Next up is OA, which stands for Open Access. This is free, unrestricted online access to material. This is often and probably predominantly used in medical journals where medical professionals will put out scientific information into a journal and it's open access, which means anyone can read it, anyone can view it, you don't have to buy the material. The next one is OOP, which stands for out of print. It means a book is no longer in print, you're no longer printing it, you don't have the rights to print it anymore. You will often put a book in print on demand, so POD, which I'll come to in a second, which basically allows the publisher to maintain the right to keep printing that material. If you're no longer selling a lot of copies of a book or whatever, the rights will revert back to the author, and you don't want to do that as a publishing house because they could essentially go to another publisher and sign a new contract with them. So when you go OOP, it means you're no longer printing that book. And that can be for various reasons, but I would say usually because you're not making enough sales on that book. The next one is a pack product or a pack. This is like a collection of books all under one book, like all under one ISBN. They will all have unique ISBNs as well, but a pack is essentially all of the, it's really confusing first of all, and I know that when I first started working on packs in production as well, it was really confusing, but it's essentially, think of it almost like a series. So we have like a cultural history series, for example, so that will be a pack. And so say like cultural history of the emotions, you'll have the pack ISBN, and then all the individual titles within that will have an ISBN as well. But packs are usually treated as one product and you won't be able to sell them separately. They will be sold as one pack. The next one is pass along rate, which I find really interesting. It's the rate at which one book is read. So for example, if you were to buy one book from a bookshop and it's new and you read it for the first time, but then you go and lend it to your friend and they read it all the way through as well, the pass along rate there would be 2 because 2 people have already read it. But then let's say they sell it to a charity shop and another person buys it and reads it, that's 3. So the pass along rate is essentially how many people read a single book. Next one is plate section. So this is like extra images within a book. It's usually printed on different paper. So you'll often see books that will be printed on normal standard text paper, and then perhaps in the middle there might be on like a glossier kind of paper a bunch of images. So yeah, it's usually on higher quality paper and it's usually in colour as well. So we in production work on them a lot, and they're usually printed at separate times. So the actual main text of the book will be printed, the plate section will be printed separately and then inserted afterwards. The next one is plotters. So this is like dummy versions of a book, kind of like proofs that you'll use for reviews or checking the printing, etc. One really interesting story that I had is when we were in the offices in Bloomsbury, we had some plotters lying around, and we had a bookshelf near our reception where you could basically take any of these books home. They were free for you to take. And I remember seeing one before and being like, this looks really interesting, because it had the front cover on there, had the back cover on there, looked like a great book. And then when you opened it up, it was empty. There was no text in there whatsoever. It was just hundreds and hundreds of plain paper. And this is sometimes what plotters are used for as well, for marketing material. So it's essentially cheaper, and if you don't have the full manuscript yet, you can print the book, but just the front cover and the back cover on it, and you can take lovely pictures of them, etc., but there will actually be nothing inside of them. So that's what plotters can be used for. The next one is pre-press, and if you break this down, pre means before and press means basically the printers, so sending it to the printers. So pre-press or pre-press costs are anything that happens before the book is printed. So this would be, for example, like typesetting or any other editorial costs. The next one is PR or a press release. And this is like a 1 or 2 page document that outlines all the information on upcoming titles or a singular title that you'll send out to the media. The next one is PI or print instruction. It's essentially an instruction to print a book. If you're low on stock, for example, you'll set up a print instruction for production like me to go and order some of those copies from printers. So in production, in my role, I get sent the PIs from our inventory managers. So they will check our stock levels and see that we're low on a title, and then they'll send me the PI, the print instruction, to start processing that, get the costs for it, get any changes incorporated, make sure the cover's done correctly, and then print it. The next one is POD, which stands for print on demand. It's essentially quite self-explanatory. It's when you print a book on demand. So if a book is typically not that popular, or you don't tend to make many sales in 1 year anymore, it's where you'll just print a small number of that book at once. So instead of printing 2,000 copies and just keeping them in your warehouse and hoping to one day sell them, you'll print on demand. So if one person orders that book, you then print that one book to order, which sometimes makes it more expensive, but typically POD is like a lower quality version of the book. So for example, images might be converted to mono, so black and white, and sometimes it'll be printed on lower quality paper as well, but that's what print on demand is. The next one is PPB. This stands for print paper binding, and this is essentially the total sum of money that it costs to print a book. The next one is Pulp, which everyone kind of gasps at when you talk about in the publishing industry. This is essentially destroying all of the books you have, destroying the stock that you have of a particular book. This can happen if perhaps there's a really big mistake in a book and you don't want to continue selling those books or anything, you just need to literally destroy them all. It's a horrible thought, and the thought of how much money that must have wasted as well, but sometimes it does have to be done. The next one is royalties, which I'll link the video down below, but I did a video on how authors get paid, talking about advances and royalties as well. Royalties are essentially a percentage of money that the publishers will give an author for their book every time a book is published, but they won't start earning royalties until their advance is paid out. But again, you can find more about how royalties and advances and how authors get paid in my video, which I'll link down below. The next one is STEM, which is usually to do with like academic publishing and journals. So it stands for science, technology, engineering, and medicine. So it's essentially just like a genre of different materials. So if you're talking about sometimes it's STM as well, if you don't have like the engineering part of it, but sometimes it's STEM. Then you have the TPS of a book, which stands for trim page size. I remember when I first started, all people would just be in the office talking about what's the TPS of this book, and the TPS of this book is this, and I genuinely had no idea what they meant, and I found it so almost like funny that they were constantly using the abbreviation. I'd be like, why aren't you just saying what it actually means? And when you use it all the time, you do end up understanding why you just say TPS. But it's essentially the trim page size, so it's the height and the width of a book, so 234 by 156 millimeters, for example. An interesting fact as well is that the UK usually measure our TPSs in millimeters, whereas the US tend to measure their TPSs in inches. The next one is WIP, and this isn't industry specific either, but this stands for work in progress. So if you're working on a WIP title, it's a work in progress book, basically. Then there's workflow. This is kind of like the standard process or system that you use to do a particular action within the publishing industry. So for example, for me, when I work on reprints, that reprints workflow begins at when the inventory manager sends me the PI, the print instruction, and then it ends when the book is actually delivered in stock to our warehouses. And finally, thank you so much for sticking around if you've made it this far. Finally, XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. Again, similar to HTML, this is a markup language. It's essentially coding files that are machine readable, but you can also read by people as well. It looks super daunting. It looks like, oh my god, coding. It looks like a complete other world. But XML is used a lot in the publishing industry, especially if you're looking at an XML first workflow, for example. But yeah, that's what XML is. It's extensible markup language. So thank you so much if you stuck it around for the whole of this video. If you haven't watched part 1 as well, please go look at that. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something today.